Okay, Mr. Baker, it's all yours.
Can you hear me, Shawn?
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Baker, and I'll be chairing the meeting today. Let us begin with a moment of reflection, and for those that are sick and trouble during these tough times. Thank you. Should I call roll?
Mr. Chairman, if you want to call roll, that'd be great, or I can do it.
I'm happy to do it, Jody.
Okay.
Dr. Haley?
I'm here.
Tom Van Ostel?
I'm here, sir.
Marty Lanahan?
Present.
Bobby Stein?
Here.
Dr. Zachary Faison?
I'm here.
General Joe DeSalvo?
Here, sir.
We've got a quorum and everybody is present. The next item is to adopt the agenda, and I would ask to amend the agenda if I could and move item 4A up to the first item under board consideration. Item 3.
Move it.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you. Caren, can you give us a safety briefing, please, ma'am?
Thank you. Since we are all, can you hear me? I'm still showing as muted. Thank you.
Yes, we can hear you, Caren.
Thank you. Since we are all remote, I would ask everyone to check your personal workspace to ensure it's free from tripping hazards and otherwise safe. Also, many of us are sitting more than usual, whether on calls or WebExes, and I want to offer a reminder to get up and stretch. Some of the benefits of stretching include increased flexibility. It helps to prevent injury. It's great for stress relief, and it can calm your mind. On our COVID-19 webpage for employees, the training course on remote work suggests stretching and exercise as a component of self-care, and we have stretching exercises on our safety page as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, ma'am. Jody Brooks, could you give us some sunshine law training?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Jody Brooks speaking for those that are just on the telephone. So pursuant to Florida Executive Order 2069, the Emergency Management COVID-19 Local Government Public Meetings, this meeting is permitted to be conducted by communications media technology. The purpose of the special meeting is to discuss and take action as necessary on the appointment of an interim CEO managing director and the procurement through a request and proposal of an executive recruitment firm, and to discuss and provide information and guidance on JEA financial statements and financial operations dashboard and an update on the JEA downtown campus. This meeting has been duly noticed. We have a quorum present. Minutes will be taken and published, and so we're in good order to proceed with this meeting. At this time, I would like to ask that Shawn Eads, our Chief Information Officer, if he would provide us with an overview of how this meeting will be conducted electronically in this virtual setting and how the public can participate. Shawn, it's all yours.
Thank you, Jody. This is Shawn Eads. Welcome everyone to this public special board meeting for JEA. The tools that we're using from called WebEx meetings, if you are in through a web browser or through the desktop application, if you scroll on your screen, you will see a series of buttons pop up in the bottom. The far left button is red right now for the vast majority of you, which means your line is currently muted. Should you get recognized during the public comment portion or have to speak during the meeting and recognized by the chair, you can unmute your line at that point. If you'd like to see the participants, if you scroll, there's an icon that looks like a person, about the fourth over from the left. If you click on that, it will bring up a list of participants, typically to the right side of your screen, and you can see there is a vast majority of folks that are on this meeting. If you happen to need to get a hold of me from a technical issue or need to get a message and you're not able to use that, there's also a chat capability. It's one more button over. It looks like somewhat of a caption window that you could click on, and it will bring up a chat window. I do want everybody to understand that this is a public meeting. Therefore, anything that you say or anything that you type will be available to everyone, and we are currently recording the meeting. When we get to the public comment section, we will use a process in WebEx called raising of the hand. If you're able to do that, what you'll see in the participant window by your name, you will see a little hand icon that's currently gray. If you click on it, it will turn blue and your hand will be raised, and then me as a moderator will help recognize you during your time. If you cannot find the technology that way, you can always chat and say, I would like to provide public comment at that time, and we'll work through that process. There are also folks that may have emailed us public comment. We will make sure that we read those during those times. And then for those that join during the phone, I will explain how you can unmute your line and have an opportunity to provide public comment at that time as well. I believe that's all. I do have control of the meeting, so if there was ever a need to mute someone for background noise, I will be doing that. I will not be doing it to quiet anyone. I just want everybody to understand that we do have that capability should we need to use it. And with that, I hand it back to the chair.
Thank you, Shawn. The next agenda item is comments from the public. Are there any comments?
So at this time, if you are using the WebEx tool, you can raise your hand by clicking on the participant window, going to your name, and clicking on the hand. If you happen to be on a phone or an iPad, you can click on, if you're on an iPhone, there's a little person in the upper right. You can click on that and get to the raise your hand. If you're on an iPad, you can click on the participant list and do the same. Otherwise, you can chat if you would like to provide comments. We will go to emails here momentarily because everyone has until 1:10 to provide those. So is there anyone that would like to provide comment through the WebEx meeting? It's a long list, so let me scroll to make sure I'm not missing anyone. I do not see anyone. If you happen to have dialed into the phone directly from a phone, not through the internet technology, and you would like to provide public comment, at this time, if you would hit *6 on your phone, it will unmute you, and you can state your name and your wish to provide comment. Please do that at this time. I do not see any. Madrika, were there any, since it is 1:10, were there any public comments submitted to us in email?
No, there were no public comments submitted via email.
Mr. Chair, there are no public comments then at this time. Thank you. The next item is Council Liaison's comments. Danny Beckton, do you have anything you want to say, sir?
Thank you for the opportunity, Chair Baker, but I don't have anything at this time.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Okay, we'll go. Okay, we'll. Getting feedback. I think that's
it stopped.
Thank you for letting me amend the agenda, and we'll go into the procurement of the executive recruiting firm, managing director, CEO recruitment. John McCarthy, are you there, sir?
John, you're unmuted.
Okay, great. Yes, sir, Mr. Chair, I'm here.
Thank you. Would you proceed to tell us how we should go about putting out the RFP and so forth?
Very well. Thank you, sir. So just for a little bit of background, as the eighth largest municipal utility in the country, JEA CEO is responsible for leading a large, complex organization, and JEA currently does not have a permanent managing director, chief executive officer. The first step in the process for the recruitment of a CEO is the selection of an executive recruiting firm. JEA staff prepared a request for proposal to solicit responses from the leading executive recruiters in the industry to find and select the most qualified candidate for JEA's permanent managing director CEO. It is important for this solicitation, and particularly for the scoring criteria, to reflect the values and input from the JEA Board of Directors in selecting the executive recruiting firm. Historically, the board has designated a board member to serve as an evaluator for proposals received and provide his or her scoring and recommendation for selection of an executive recruiting firm to the full board for approval. So today, with this as an agenda item, what our recommendation is for the board to provide input and feedback on the RFP, particularly the scoring criteria. The board approved publishing the RFP, incorporating any board recommendations to solicit responses from the top executive recruiting firms in the utility industry, and that the board designate a board member to serve as the scorer for proposals received, or specify another scoring arrangement satisfactory to the board and selection of an executive recruiting firm. So in the board package is a 25-page draft solicitation that's ready to go. And also attached is the proposal form that lists the scoring criteria on a 2-page document that the proposers would fill out. We've also have a couple of slides just to show the 4 different scoring criteria that are currently in the solicitations. Currently, we have weighted them equally, 25 points each. The first one is the qualifications of the firm, and then search methodology, qualifications of the proposed team, and the fee structure. In addition, we often would do presentations that would also be scored after. So they're currently, the way it's set up, there's 100 points allocated to the written proposals, which would be scored. And then at JEA's option, we would have presentations, which have typically been added another 50 to 100 points, depending on the preferences of the evaluation team. So I'm sitting by to answer any questions. As far as timeline goes, we'll use our informal process. It's about a 3-week process if we do the presentations. We've also already contacted all the executive recruiting firms that we know of, and they're ready to receive this and turn around proposals quickly if we do. That's all I had to present, Mr. Chair. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Questions of John?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Jody Salvo. John, thanks for the presentation. On page 69 of the document, which I guess is page 7, 2 bullets I have a question on. One is the proximity of the lead consultant's office location to JEA. I'm not sure why that's a discriminator. I would submit, we as long as we've got the highest quality consultant from the search firm, I'm not sure if we want to pin or limit ourselves just because of a location issue. And then number 2, the fee structure on bullet D, again, 25 points. I'm not so sure. I have a hard time, cheaper the better. I've got it. We want to be cost efficient, but we certainly don't want to constrain ourselves with making sure we have a high quality search firm to get the best possible athlete, in this case, the CEO for the position. So just 2 of my concerns on those. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
With Doug, this is Bobby. Yes.
Go ahead, Bobby.
John, I agree with Joe. I believe, having location shouldn't be a criteria, and I think we should, I think whoever we pick should be competitive, but not the lowest cost. I think what we want is somebody that has the best ability to find the right candidate.
Would you all propose to reduce the weighting of the cost below 25%?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Joe DeSalvo, I say eliminate it. I don't think it should be a factor. Thank you.
I mean, John, I think it should be a factor, but most of these firms I've worked with are pretty much in the same range. So I
Right.
think we look at it, but I think it shouldn't be a deciding factor. I mean, it should be in the same zip code, but not being a deciding factor.
Mr. Chair, I have two questions. This is Dr. Haley. Are we obligated to take the lowest bidder? That's number one. Okay, good. So then I think it still should be scored. It ought to be one of the metrics we look at. I'm okay with it being 25%. And as long as we don't have to automatically accept the lowest bidder, I think we should just at least see what their fee structures look like.
Others?
I would keep it in at its current weighted value. It's Marty.
Okay. Well, I think we're.
Mr. Chairman, can I add something just to put it in context? If we do the presentations, there'll be an additional 50 to 100 points. So actually, we'll be scoring it out of potentially 150 or 200 points, which would make that 25 points, even a lower weight if we did that.
Thank you. Okay. Can we get a motion to accept the proposed format?
Can I ask another question? I'm sorry.
Sure.
In the past, when I was searching for a DOT secretary, we asked for firms to show that they had the ability to find a diverse candidate pool and that they had diversity on their team as well. Is that gone out of vogue, John McCarthy? It's been many years since I did that.
No, not at all. And in the on the scope of work, the very first page of the solicitation, I'm looking over it now, but that is most likely in there. But that and also working with municipal utilities are typically things that differentiate some of the recruiting firms.
Yeah, I didn't catch it my first time around on diversity, but
we'll make sure that's in there.
Sure it is.
Yeah, because it's not in there.
Yeah. I'd just like to also echo those sentiments that Marty mentioned. I didn't see it either, and I certainly would like for that to be added in terms of the scope of kinds of characteristics that we're looking at. This is Zachary.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Okay.
John, I got a quick question. Is to narrow these firms down, John McCarthy, I mean, are you going to do reference checks? Are we doing reference checks? How are we, are we going to see a group of people, or are you guys going to narrow them down? And if so, are you going to do the reference checks?
So the procurement staff would typically do the reference checks and evaluations against the minimum qualifications. Then only those companies would be scored. The scoring in the past, we've had a JEA board member take over as kind of an elite evaluator and be supported by JEA staff as needed. So on the min quals, we would typically do that. I think in this case, we would certainly, if a lead board member is designated, we could get the approval of that before we send that out. And then we would go on to the scoring phase. And that would happen fairly quickly.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, this is Tom Van Oswald. I think that's a critical question. And I thought I saw that under provision of references specifically under qualification of the team, which I think is critical.
Right.
And I have one more point, if you don't mind. On the front page, I would recommend under scope of work, bringing forward that we are looking for this firm to educate all candidates that they will be interviewing in the sunshine. That tends to take people out of our candidacy pool from time to time, and I don't want anybody to waste time with a candidate. So I would move that forward to that page.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, with those proposed changes, could we get a motion to use that format and proceed?
I'll move it.
Is there a second?
This is Tom Van Osdol.
Thank you, Tom. Further discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Bobby, as head of the search committee, could you be the scorer?
Yep.
Thank you. I know you've got a lot on your plate. I appreciate it. The next item is the CEO Managing Director interim appointment. I have invited Paul McElroy to come today. Do any of you all have any others that you would like to speak today or speak at a later time? Hearing none, I would like for the board, you may have received, I hope you received some information from Paul McElroy giving us some background history on his career and his successes at JEA. But I would ask him just to get this started. Paul, would you mind giving us a quick bio on you and then talk about your career at JEA and what were the major accomplishments you thought you had?
Thank you, Chair Baker, and board members. Thank you for your service and the opportunity to speak with you. And also thank you to the employees, for without them, I wouldn't have the opportunity again, and we would not have had the success that I had during my tenure at JEA. Let me start a little bit on the personal side. We've lived in, my wife and I have lived in the Jacksonville area, 15 of the past years in Jacksonville, but we've lived here in Northeast Florida for a total of 22 years. I came to this area via corporate relo, and we deliberately chose to stay here with our family and raise our children. And in hindsight, it was a terrific decision many years ago. I have a wonderful wife of 32 years, Linda. We have 3 grown children, and I have 2 grandchildren. My business background, and as Chair Baker indicated, I had provided my resume, but at a higher level, I've got a mix of public and private sector experience. I've managed and led short and long cycle businesses. I've led businesses in both the consumer and the commercial sectors. I've got a roughly a 44-year career, 18 of which was in the finance area at various levels, and 26 in general management and marketing, the last being CEO at JEA. I think it's, looking back at my career and to share just a little bit of information about me, I thought I might talk about some cultural transformations that I led, and 3 in particular. I'll combine transformation 1 and 2 because they're pre-JEA, but I think it's instructional or at least informative about how I go about leading an organization. In Transformation 1, it was a relatively young and a slow growth business that had sort of a one-size-fits-all marketing approach, and we were operating in a monopoly market. Transformation 2 was a very different one. It was a slow growth, mature business, again with a one-size-fits-all, but yet in a competitive marketplace. In looking back over my current time there, we had significant accomplishments, but the common competencies that I had as a leader was to establish and lead high-performance teams, specifically leadership teams, relying very heavily on my communication and relationship skills, ensuring that there was employee and customer engagement at all levels of the organization during the transformation period, focused on market planning, segmentation, pricing, and value-added services in order to lead transformation. Also, a common theme was an allocation of more resources to frontline activities. And in all cases, improving customer satisfaction and lowering cost, again, was a common theme and a common outcome. At JEA, it was a little different, and I look back, and it's interesting how history can sort of, I hate to say repeat itself, but we can sort of learn from history and at least be educated in the past as we plot the course forward. In 2012, we were undergoing a leadership change at JEA, and my assessment was that in order to move forward, we needed to leverage and preserve the expertise that we had in asset management, asset deployment, operational excellence, environmental stewardship, and financial management. And so those things, the employees of JEA were doing extremely well. And under the past leaders of Walt Busells and Jim Dickinson, Walt, the great builder of huge infrastructures and assets, Jim, under his leadership, the refining of running the systems and increasing reliability, as well as starting to put a financial framework in place, as I was CFO with him, that much of which survived and flourished right up until 2018, and I think continues today. But the transformation really was about winning customers' loyalty. We had lost sort of our contact with our customers, and we had to get back to that and strategically valuing our stakeholder relationships throughout the communities we serve. And most importantly, what I articulated to the board at that time, realizing the untapped potential of all employees. Our goals were very simple at the time, and I think they still, and maybe even more so today, are important, was to actively participate in the growth of Jacksonville, adding value and strength to the economy and the moral fabric of our community. And very interesting at that time, it was to bring the national story of excellence and recognition and achievement from outside of the county lines back home to Jacksonville. JEA was thought of very highly in the community of public power, and really in terms of the electric industry and the water sewer industry nationally as a leader. And we didn't quite have that connection with our home customers, so we needed to do that. And in order to do that, we set out 4 or 5 areas: focus on market development, our customers, stakeholder relations, human resources, and strategic alignment. In 2012, we launched a strategic planning initiative and worked closely with the board. It really took most of 2013. We launched in September of 2013. And we took a accelerated transformation format. The first step was to really take time out and challenge ourselves. Really look at the reality of the marketplace, look at the reality of our competitors, look at the reality of our position within the community, and look at the reality of emerging trends that might have an impact on our business. So we took that and said, how do we address that? How do we address that going forward? And the most important thing that came forward in working with the senior team at the time and with the board was alignment with the board and the management team and engagement through the entire organization, right to the frontline team players. And so we structured and kept up through the transformation process a cascading effect or process where we laid out the plan, but got input each level in the organization as we communicated the plan, and asked for commitments to achieve the plan. We laid out a mission and vision and values, and we really focused again on customers, operational excellence. And the third leg was to develop the unbeatable team, focus on our people, their growth and development. We kept that up for through the 5.5 years that I was CEO. And it was very important to engage everybody and develop teams and get input from the first line people to our managers, to our professional engineers, because there's a tremendous amount of knowledge and talent there. And I believe that they can tackle any problem, any challenge that we provide them. I think some of the results there have been shared with you. We drove customer satisfaction and loyalty as measured by J.D. Power. We were 116 out of 121. High number is bad. We got to the first quartile on the consumer side. On the commercial side, the business side, we were in the area of 80 versus 90. These are national electric utilities, independently surveyed their customers for the result from J.D. Power. And we moved in 3 years to the first place nationally. We recognized number one in the country for customer satisfaction from our commercial customers in 2016. We also kept up the focus on lowering costs and driving greater margins and greater value to ensure that the total organization was focused on costs, because costs result in the price we charge our customers. And driving our costs down over time through the application of technology and better processes and investment was critical to our success and customer satisfaction. We were able to achieve that through 2018 and continue to deliver outstanding customer satisfaction as well as financial performance. We paid down approximately $2 billion in debt in total from the peak. I think you heard at the last meeting, in excess of $3 billion since the high mark of 2009, 2010. And that was through a lot of hard work and financial planning and structuring to achieve that goal and put our balance sheet in a much better position today than it was 5 years ago and certainly 10 years ago. The environmental footprint and impact through the contribution of our professionals in both operations as well as environmental services was able to reduce the impact, and you saw that in terms of our river, the nitrogen discharge. We made investments there and continue to focus on that in terms of systems and other activities. And our air quality improved in our transition to natural gas from the coal plant at SJRPP, and will continue to improve with the expansion of our solar, which will happen next year, and ultimately bringing nuclear into the fuel mix or generation stack in 3 or 4 years when Vogtle comes online. When we look at that, that'll be basically a 45% reduction in CO2 emissions from the start of those plans in 2010 to 2012. A very significant improvement. And we started, quite frankly, when we looked at 2008-9, JEA in its electric generation was number 5 in the nation of CO2 intensity in its electric generation. So we were producing a lot of CO2 and had a lot of risk if we had not moved forward with it. So big environmental improvement. As far as employee engagement and involvement, we reached out and made sure that all employees were communicated to and involved in the process and decision-making and staying engaged with the plan and our mission and vision. And there were a number of success stories with that. But we tested independently the satisfaction rates and the engagement rates, more engagement rates of the team at JEA. And near the 17 and 18 timeframe, we reached an 80% milestone in terms of engagement and satisfaction. So it was a tremendous accomplishment in terms of moving forward with our team, with our processes, and with our customers during the transformation. I think that's it, Chair Baker. I'll certainly be available for any other questions or conversation. Oops. Hello? Oh, wonderful.
We still hear you, Mr. McElroy.
Okay. Well, I'm going to kick it back to Chair Baker.
Other questions of Paul?
John, it's Marty, if I could say a couple of things.
Please.
I had the honor and privilege of working with Paul when I was on the board in the past. He was the CFO at the time, and I've watched his career. I watched him replace Jim, and I've watched his commitment to something that I held near and dear when I was on the board in the past, which was reducing the debt obligation of the JEA. And I've watched him explore alternative solutions for revenue streams, which I think is important in the utility business. And, you know, to remind myself of his history, I did a little internet stalking of Mr. Paul McElroy, and it appears, Paul, that your resignation back in April of 18 really was around the issue that I think this board addressed spot on in our first meeting, which was the letter to the JEA associates. And, you know, stating that the JEA is not for sale. And I was thrilled that when John mentioned that you would be interested in coming back. I haven't seen you in many, many years or talked to you in many, many years, but I think that you have the right attention to the future for us as an organization at a time when, candidly, as a new board member, I'm looking for a nod to the past to help us navigate some issues like Plant Vogel, to help us with the rating agencies. I've watched you masterfully work with them over the years. I like your attention to engagement of our associates, focus on employees and satisfaction, and the stability that you bring because of your knowledge. And I think this, in a funny way, is a nod to the past when we've all said we're focused on the future. But I think this is a nod to stability, and a nod that I'm very happy to support. So thank you, John, for letting me speak.
Thank you, Marty. Others?
Yeah, hi, John. Joe. I just say I had a very candid conversation with Paul. It was and a very fruitful conversation. I'm convinced that Paul's the right man because he understands the criticality of culture and the importance of values and getting the right ethical climate of dignity, respect, transparency, and high standards back within JEA and the community. So I think it's a perfect choice, and he has my endorsement. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Joe.
Mr. Chair, this is Tom Van Oswald. And Mr. McElroy, you and I met through the Jax USA Policy Council, and I haven't had the pleasure of serving directly with you, but I just, again, want to express my appreciation for the number of times in the way that you outlined, the way that you lead, ultimately, that you referenced employee and associate engagement, involving them, not just communicating the plan, getting their input on the plan, getting their buy-in and commitment in the plan, and really unifying and galvanizing a team and creating culture within the organization, right culture. And also the number of times that you referenced restoring customer confidence and providing specific ways that you would go about doing it. I think those are two absolute foundational components for JEA right now. And I wholeheartedly support your nomination, and I appreciate the spirit in which you engage that conversation.
Thank you.
Other questions? One question I have, Paul, is why do you want to do this?
It's a question that my wife and I thought long and hard about. There are four specific reasons, but before that, if I may, just a moment on context, which sort of helps. I think we'll understand the four reasons why I've elected to ask if I can help. 2 years ago, when I look at JEA, it was a nationally and recognized leader. It's an amazing team of professionals, as I mentioned in my earlier remarks, excelled at delivering customer service, operational performance, had financial performance and management systems and practices in place, and had a governance policy and set of procedures, including ethics and compliance and internal audit, that was the envy of the industry. It led to a high level of community and employee satisfaction and engagement. And well, over the last 2 years, that's been documented and a matter of public record and very disappointing to me. But over the past 6 months, a number of people have asked me about JEA, and I've told them that if a new board, and I would stress a new board, thinks I can play a role in facilitating their goals and ultimately the success of restoring trust, restoring trust and public trust in JEA, I'll help in any way I can. I think that really leads us to where there was a core breakdown, and I believe it's more in the upper levels of JEA. It's not in the rank and file and the folks that do the hard work within the organization. But there needs to be a restoration of the JEA Code of Ethics and the full understanding and commitment of our team of the responsibility for public service. You know, ethics, and I know I don't really need to address or communicate to this group, but to the broader group listening, ethics is defined as the study of moral principles and values and moral choices to be made by individuals in their relationships with others. Ethics is more than the avoidance of unethical, immoral, and criminal behavior. In the public sector, and I've said this a number of times, it is the avoidance of the perception, not the actual, but the perception of unethical or immoral or criminal behavior that is required as a public servant. And we at JEA and JEA are all committed to take the responsibility for creating government and a government agency that has trust and confidence of its citizens as the public service we are. And all employees are public service. And they hold their positions solely to benefit the public. They must adhere to the highest ethical standards. JEA employees will strive to meet higher ethical standards and expectations for public service, regardless of personal considerations or gains, and recognize that as the primary path to earning the customer's respect is high moral and ethical leadership. The failure to do so, I felt, was squarely in the leadership, not the rank and file of JEA. So having spent 16 years building JEA, it was almost 2 years ago when I left, I believe that I can help the board restore a culture of ethics and responsibility for public service. I believe I can help the board restore trust and position JEA for the future. I believe I can help our community by providing reassurance that their JEA is a reliable and financially healthy and public safe utility. And I can help the JEA employees by providing them with the dignity, respect, and trust they deserve and earn every day on the job. So that's why, Chair Baker, I'm here and willing to help and support the board in any way I can.
Thank you, Paul. Anybody else have any questions they would like to ask of Paul?
Yeah, John, I want to make two quick comments. One, I appreciate your leadership in moving an interim of Paul's quality so quickly. And integrity is what John Baker's about, and moving this and taking the leadership to get a great interim as fast as he can. Thank you. On Paul, I've known Paul for a long time, and I've known how he's worked with his team and worked with the community to build a great Jacksonville. And I'm excited to have the two of you guys, John Baker as chairman and Paul hopefully is the CEO in the leadership roles.
Zachary, do you or Leon have anything you want?
I actually, yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. McElroy, one of the things that I kind of took when I was looking at the materials that you submitted, I think it's uncontroverted. I mean, your experience and the tremendous leadership that you provided to JEA when you were here formally serving. My question is that you, in some of the materials you submitted, you mentioned under a subheading about recruitment, training, and diversity. And I'll just be really forthright. One of the things and I think you said recruitment, training, and diversity that reflects the community. Can you talk a little bit more about, what your philosophy is in that regard? As I look at JEA's leadership, senior leadership in particular, I'll just be forthright. I don't see that level of diversity that really reflects the community. And I know that's something that you mentioned, that you have a real commitment towards, and undergirds kind of your leadership ethos. So can you talk a little bit about, your commitment towards that in terms of recruitment, training, and diversity that really does reflect our community?
Yes, and I think that's a great question. Thanks. I missed that in my remarks. I believe that the workforce of JEA should ultimately reflect the composition of the community in all aspects. We are public servants. We are essentially owned by the community and here to serve the community. And so it's important and incumbent upon leadership to ensure that its recruiting and retention policies and really developmental policies for the team allow that to grow and flourish. I too was surprised at seeing the page in the documentation last week in terms of the composition of the senior team. We have slipped back, and that certainly is unfortunate. But it can be changed, and we can get back on the diversity plan. What we did was we looked at a comprehensive view of the makeup of our workforce. We looked at where the feeder parts to the system of the workforce were, whether it was the high school or college level parts of the community, and did a fairly robust analysis and found that we did have a mismatch. And so we dug in a little deeper in terms of recruiting and found that there were some biases within the way we essentially addressed and recruited in the community at large. So we changed that. We changed the way we deliver the civil service exam for entry-level positions. We changed our outreach to ensure that we had more diverse candidate slates and that more people were given the opportunity, and not just the opportunity for the first time, but they were aware and given the opportunity for training and information prior to testing and becoming part of the JEA family. We looked at various ways of changing, and we did change in a couple of our lines of business the way people are promoted, and that helped certainly in the water and sewer business in terms of moving some folks upwardly in the organization. And I made a commitment when we made our team initially, and some of those we've lost over the last period of time. But if we go back 3 years and look at the slate of leadership, we had a more diverse team there, and I think in the second level as well. It's hard work. Candidate slates that were required to have a diverse candidate slate, or else the slate didn't go forward. And that's a place to start. And those were always involved with our HR executives. We broke down to having HR executives aligned with the businesses, and they worked with the management team and worked to incorporate best practices in terms of making sure that we got the best and the brightest people on the JEA team that reflected the community in which we serve.
Thank you. I'm excited to hear that there might be a desire under your leadership to recapture some of that lost focus on really putting the kinds of policies and protocols in place that would divulge diversity and inclusion throughout the organization. So thank you for that.
I guess one just follow-up comment on that. It's sure. My history over decades now is that it's good business, and it's sort of dumb business not to, and it's really, really, really important that we have a good interface with our customer base, and people can, and really it helps empathy, it helps understanding, and it helps us provide better solutions for our customers. So thank you.
Yep. Fully agree. Thank you.
Paul, this is Dr. Haley. that was going to be one of my questions. So I'm glad you answered, and I really appreciate your answer. And I too want to congratulate you on your resume and your background. I think you would be an excellent fit. My question goes back to, and you touched on this before around trust. Obviously, one of the missing components of JEA in the community, and what's happened in the past has been sort of lack of trust, I think, with the employees, lack of trust in the community. So can you talk a little bit more about how you would approach helping this organization, helping this board gain its trust back in the community?
I have an interesting perspective on that. I'm not sure I've read it in any management books, but to me, trust is earned, and so to a large extent, trust is an output. And so, in order to get to that point, what we've got to focus on is all the great attributes that we've been working on in terms of service, delivery, reliability, and performance, as well as customer satisfaction, making it easy to do business with us, and ensuring that we are compassionate and we understand the needs of our customers, and build that one day at a time. And by focusing and engaging and really hopefully motivating our team that we're moving forward in the right direction here, that's how we'll ultimately deliver earn trust back to the community. I think trust as a strategy doesn't work very successfully. I think in terms of doing the fundamentals, in terms of focusing on our mission and vision and values and behaving ethically and ensuring that really the community knows that we are public servants, we are above reproach in terms of our ethical standards, that we will earn their loyalty. We're not here to just deliver service, but we want loyalty because we need to expand and grow the community, that we're here to represent the community in all aspects. We will continue to deliver based upon the professional and intellect and intelligence of our workforce, the best solutions at the lowest possible cost, highly reliable, and we're going to grow and develop our team. And with that, we'll have outstanding delivery, we'll have outstanding reliability, we'll manage cost, and in that, I think we will continue to communicate, but we will then earn back that trust we lost.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I think Paul is an outstanding candidate, and we are truly lucky to have him. But the way the world seems to be working these days, nothing is easy. I learned last night that as part of Paul's pension, as you can imagine, there's not a desire to have people double dip and retire, collect a pension, and then come back and work and earn a salary while they're also collecting the pension. And so there's some hurdles you have to get through. One of the exceptions to that rule here is that a retired JEA person can come back and work for 6 months full time, but no longer. After 6 months, they have to go to a part-time status where they work no more than 50 hours every 2 weeks. We have got a process ahead of us to find a senior person. It is my view that even if we just had 6 months of Paul, we would be miles ahead, and we'd be miles ahead of looking for somebody for a month before we even started with somebody we didn't know. And so it's my recommendation that we hire Paul for the 6 months. If we can attract a first-class CEO before the 6 months is over, perfect. If we cannot, it would be up to us to appoint, either accept him working part-time, or probably more likely get another interim to carry us through. It's not as smooth as what we would all like, but it's the alternative that we have. And I'd like to hear y'all's thoughts on whether that's, a deal breaker.
Mr. Chair, I think that's an advisable way forward, kind of given some of the what you shared with regard to the pension, and I would for one be in favor of that. Again, I think Mr. McElroy will bring the kind of leadership and stability that we're needing, at least for the next 6 months, and I would hope that we would be able to identify someone going forward within that 6 month time period. But even in the event that we aren't, I think the plan that you've laid out in terms of perhaps bringing him on part-time or what have you, if in fact we came to that, I think would be the desirous way forward.
Other thoughts?
I agree with Mr. Faison.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that either. And I'd like to just go ahead and recommend that you work, presuming that we move in this direction, that you work directly with Paul offline about compensation structures, because I know it is complicated when you're trying to work around an existing pension.
I also agree with Marty's thought process here.
What I've done with Paul so far is we dug up his old contract that he was just about to sign before he left, and he was making $520,000 in the year 2017-18, and the contract had automatic escalation clauses of 3% a year. If that had carried out, and there were other fringe benefits, a business allowance for a telephone, et cetera, of $1,000 a month, an auto allowance of $850 a month, normal medical and insurance, he would be at $552,083 as an annual salary without a bonus. There is no bonus included in his pay package. And obviously, if we hired him for 6 months, it would be for half of that if we chose to give him that contract. He is willing to do it for that. We have not, that seemed like a fair process to me. I looked at the 2017-18 comparisons of what percentile that put him in. It was right at the 50th percentile. I think he's a lot better than the 50th percentile. So in a way, I think it's a bargain. Jody, can you walk us through the contract? Or is that too cumbersome?
No, Mr. Chair. I had taken a look at his prior contract in 2018. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
And had gone through and, based upon our conversations from yesterday and early this morning, I kind of went through his agreement. The engagement, I had suggested it start on May 11th, which is next Monday, which is the beginning of a new pay cycle, and that would give the employees enough time to get him re-onboarded. And so the effective date would be May 11th from the engagement from a full-time perspective, and it would run through November 8th. And that would be the less than 6 months, so it wouldn't interfere with his retirement benefits. And then if you decided to keep him on a part-time basis, the part-time schedule would then, if we wanted to do a year term, would start November 9th and then end on May 10th. So that's a 1-year engagement is what I had envisioned with a full-time component and then a part-time component. All of the duties and the responsibilities had stayed the same from his original contract. Again, beginning May 11th. The compensation, as you described, would be Section 2.1 of the agreement that would provide a salary for the 6-month full-time period of $280,183, and then a biweekly installment on an hourly rate basis of $323.29 for the part-time period. There is in his agreement other benefits such as a vehicle allowance, business allowance, and annual leave, and then all other benefits that JEA employees would be provided, at whatever benefits he would choose to have during this 1-year period term. There would be no additional pension benefits. There's nothing that would change or modify his current pension, but there has been a request that the same amount from a contribution, the defined contribution, would be set aside, and at the end of the agreement that the JEA would provide that to Paul. The termination and extension provisions, we modified that somewhat, that the term of the agreement would end no later than May 10th of 2021. And there's a provision in there that I modified that the JEA or the employee at no reason can terminate the agreement with 14 days notice, a 2-week notice. Took out any provisions dealing with cause or no cause. And that's really the high points of the agreement. And again, this was drafted this morning by me from a couple conversations. And so if the board would like to entertain a motion to employ Mr. Paul McElroy under the terms of this reemployment agreement as the interim CEO, managing director, we could take a motion at this time or have further discussion.
Can I make a statement quickly?
Yes, please.
You know, I'm very mindful during a period of time in our country where so many people are challenged and struggling, that these are big numbers, right? It's a big package, and I'm comfortable with that package because of when I was chair previously. Walt Bucell's retired when I was chair, and we passed the baton to Jim Dickinson. But at the time, we did a great deal of research around compensation. We are one of the largest utilities in the country, and if our associates at the JEA were at a privately held company, which they are not going to be, based on our letter, that the compensation package would be in many times 3 or 4 or 5 times this amount. So I just feel compelled to say that I'm comfortable with this number and your approach, John, but it's based on the fact that I've had the benefit of that type of market research in the past. But I do appreciate that this is a very, very, it's a big number. I mean, that's a big package.
Others?
I mean, Marty, I think you make a great point, but I feel that the package that's presented is an appropriate package, and I would give John Baker the ability to finish the contract as he sees fit. But what I see and what I've heard, I think it's appropriate contract for the type of person we're getting today.
Yeah, this is Zachary. I would just add that I believe that the package is likely commensurate with the role and responsibility, particularly for a utility of this size and scope. So I wouldn't have any issue with that per se. I would like to ask Jody, if I could, Mr. Chair, are there any stipulations with regard to Mr. McElroy's candidacy for the permanent position, given that he's serving as interim? I just wanted to know, just have clarity with regard to persons that serve as an interim, whether they would be eligible or not eligible to take on the position permanently.
To the chair, Dr. Faison, there's nothing addressed in the agreement, and I guess we need to talk with Paul about whether or not he would be willing to, if he's going to pursue the permanent position, come out of retirement. But my understanding, it was just an interim position that he wouldn't be vying for it, but we probably need to hear from him directly on that point.
Thank you.
From my perspective, it would be an interim only. And that's really, remember earlier on, I said it had 32 lovely years of marriage to Linda. Permanent would disrupt that. So yes, right now, I think I can play an important role in the interim and work towards settling things down and starting to look at the future and lay the tracks for, a successful transition.
He said that a lot nicer than he said it to me. So, to me, and I'm wide open for suggestions. If you all, if somebody would like to nominate him, I would accept a motion. If you would feel comfortable in interviewing others, I think that's equally as appropriate.
I'd make a motion that we move forward with Paul McElroy under the terms that were outlined today.
Second.
Further discussion?
Mr. Chairman, this is Tom Van Os. I only have one other comment. Fully support the motion. It's the second 6 months of the agreement, I guess, that I'm just commenting on. The first 6 months full time, I think that's great. I think we are blessed that Mr. McElroy is willing to serve again. Having been through, knowing that we have a front end part to select the firm, and then selecting the right talent, which it's going to take just the right individual in this role, and it won't be a short process. And then, presuming that person is presently employed, they'll have to disengage, in an orderly fashion from where they're employed to transition to us. I won't be personally surprised if it takes a bit longer than 6 months. And my only comment is, if it were for a very short period of time that a person were working 50 hours a week in this role, that might work. If it would look like it were going to be any significant period of time, this is beyond a full-time job. So I would, but again, I think the 14-day termination clause in here allows for that eventuality. I just wanted to be on record saying I think if for any period of time this isn't anything less than a full-time job. But having said that, fully support the nomination and the agreement as it's proposed.
Tom, I think you're right on the money. As great as Paul is, I think we would open ourselves up to a lot of justifiable criticism if we had him in there part-time for any length of time. And so what I would pledge to you all is that we'll read the process, see how it's going. There are search firms that can provide interims that are ex-CEOs. We certainly have some strong people here. I think when the 6 months comes, we've got to have a plan in place to move forward, to have a full-time person at the helm, unless it's just, we're on the 1 foot line. But I appreciate your comment and share it.
Thank you, sir.
Other comments?
The only thing I'd add, John, is in September, we should come up with a plan that it looks like we're going to get a permanent, looks like it's going to take us longer. And I think, it gives us a couple months to work through this decision point.
Yeah, I would agree with that, John. I had the same concern that Tom brought up. So I think knowing what we believe our strategy is going to be in November, if we're not at a final solution point, what we're going to do. And I think the sooner we can start that process, the better.
And Bobby, can I just get you to amend your motion, a friendly amendment to allow the chairman to execute the agreement based upon the terms that were presented here today?
Absolutely.
To finalize the agreement. Thank you.
Absolutely.
All those in favor say aye.
Uh,
Aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you. And congratulations, I think, Paul.
Thank you. And thank you, board members.
I congratulate our board because we've gotten a really great guy that will make a difference and will get us launched in the right direction and is the kind of guy we can work with to make things happen. So we go to our next item B, which is the introduction to JEA financial statements. Joe, are you prepared to help us?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chair. This is Joe Orfano, and welcome. I'd like to introduce John DeSanto as our next presenter. John is a managing director at Ernst & Young and is one of the leaders in E&Y's public sector and utility practice in the state of Florida. John has spent over 30 years auditing governments and governmental utilities throughout the state. John has been the coordinating partner for JEA's audit for the past 4 years. And of note, E&Y has been JEA's auditor for the past 16 fiscal years. John leads most of E&Y's Florida governmental and single audit training and frequently is a presenter for E&Y's national governmental and single audit training as well. He is a CPA in Florida, New York, and Puerto Rico, and is also an adjunct professor at the University of South Florida in Tampa. So I now turn the mic over to John.
Great. Thank you, Joe. Shawn, can everybody hear me okay? Great. Well, welcome. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to talk. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the board. I'm looking forward to working with you all in your new capacity to the extent possible. We've put together this financial statement presentation analysis. I think there were some questions regarding the accounting differences between your public versus your private type utilities. So hopefully this is more at an executive summary level. It's a high level overview of JEA's financial statements and financial reporting for your benefit. If you can move on to the next slide, please. JEA is a component unit of the city of Jacksonville. And what that means is JEA is included in the city's comprehensive annual financial report, or CAFR. And the reason for that is that JEA's governing body is appointed by the mayor and confirmed by the council, and the city has the ability to exercise influence over JEA through formal budgetary approval. And as a governmental entity, JEA follows the accounting standards of the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, or the GASB, and that does differ in many areas from FASB and investor-owned utilities. Next slide, please. So what are the financial reporting or financial statement reporting requirements under GASB? You will note in JEA's financial statements that it starts off with a management's discussion and analysis section. That is different from private utilities unless they are public under the SEC. So that is one difference you'll see between GASB and FASB. In addition to the management's discussion and analysis, the basic financial statements, that would be your balance sheet, your operating statement, and statement of cash flows, including the footnotes to those financial statements. GASB also requires certain supplementary information, and of all the information they require to be reported in this section of your financial report, JEA only has certain pension and other post-employment benefit plan information that's required to be disclosed. And then there are some other reporting requirements. JEA receives from time to time certain federal and state financial assistance programs that are subject to the uniform guidance and state of Florida compliance audits. In the case of the federal government, that would include FEMA costs for hurricanes Matthew and Irma. that are still being reimbursed, and those funds are still subject to audit. And in the case of your state programs, there's also some emergency management funds, as well as some other water sustainability and other funds from time to time. The threshold that triggers those compliance audits is total expenditures under all award programs of $750,000, so it is pretty low. But there have been some years during our tenure as JEA's auditors that those audits have not been required. They are required. The compliance audits were required for 2019, and we anticipate for 2020 as well. Next slide, please. One of the other unique aspects about accounting at JEA is, as a utility, there is a provision for regulatory accounting practices that are permissible. And I listed the specific references from the GASB statement number 62 here. What regulatory accounting means is that it allows for the deferral of certain costs and revenues on the balance sheet that will not be immediately recovered through the rate-making process. So you will note on JEA's financial statements, and we're going to talk about what those items are in the next few slides. But what that does mean is that there are going to be certain expenses that are incurred in some revenue streams that are not immediately recognized as revenues or expenses and are deferred on the balance sheet until they become part of that rate-making process. In order to qualify for regulatory accounting, there are certain criteria that have to be met, and the three criteria are listed here. Rates are established. They must be established and approved by the board, which they always have been at JEA. Rates are set to recover the costs of providing those regulatory services, and the rates can be charged to and collected from customers. Next slide, please. The regulatory accounts that you'll see on the balance sheet of JEA are reflected as costs to be recovered from future revenues. So those would be the costs that are deferred, that are not immediately passed through, if you will, to your customers through the rate-making process, and revenues to be used for future costs. So the revenues that are deferred are called revenues to be used for future costs, and the costs that are deferred to be billed later to customers are called costs to be recovered from future revenues. So what are some of those specific items? I'll start with the deferred costs to be recovered from future revenues. So these will be costs that have not yet been billed to customers and will be billed over time. There are some debt-related costs, such as every time you issue debt, there are issue costs and things of that nature that are not immediately passed through to your customers. Also, there's unfunded pension and OPEB costs. At the time, JEA was required to recognize on the financial statements the unfunded pension and OPEB, other post-employment benefit costs. So those are also included as a cost to be recovered from future revenues. Some environmental project costs, and also some costs related to the storms. That would be Matthew, Irma, and also Dorian. Next slide, please. Some of the deferred regulatory credits, those would be the deferred costs for the deferred revenues, excuse me. And those would be your fuel stabilization, environmental charges, your non-fuel purchase power, any excess pension and OPEB contributions, so any contributions made over and above what the actuaries determine are required, those also get deferred. Self-insurance and medical reserves, and a customer benefit stabilization fund. Next slide, please. GASB also introduces the term that you will not see in the private sector, terms called deferred inflows and deferred outflows of resources. And GASB defines these items as inflows and outflows of resources that do not meet the definition of assets and liabilities. Like all standard setters, GASB has certain definitions and things that certain items must reach, transactions must fall under in order to be recognized as assets or liabilities. And those items that don't quite meet that, GASB didn't know what to do with them. So they created their own financial statement elements, and they call these deferred inflows and outflows of resources. The interesting thing about these deferred inflows and outflows of resources is that only GASB dictates to entities following their standards what can be recorded as a deferred inflow and outflows of resources. I like to, for simplicity's sakes, I always like to say your deferred outflows of resources are very similar to like deferred expenses, prepaid expenses, and things of that nature, while your deferred inflows of resources are very similar to things like unearned revenues and items like that. So your deferred outflows of resources are presented on the left side of the balance sheet directly under your assets, and deferred inflows of resources are credits that are reflected underneath liabilities on the right side of your balance sheet. Next slide, please. So JEA reports the following items as deferred outflows of resources on the balance sheet after total assets. Some unrealized pension and OPEB contributions and losses, deferred losses on bond refundings. Oftentimes when you issue refunding bonds, while there's an economic gain or a positive cash flow gain, there's an accounting loss that takes place, and that loss is something that gets recorded as a deferred outflow of resources. JEA also hedges certain of their fuel contracts, and the change in the values of those hedging derivatives also get recorded as a deferred outflow of resource. And then your asset retirement obligations. Over the past few years, JEA has retired or shut down 2 of its facilities, the St. John's power plant and also one of the Sharon towers and plants. So those asset retirement obligations are also reflected as deferred outflows of resources. Next slide, please. Moving on to the deferred inflows of resources. And again, those are presented on your balance sheet after total liabilities. And interestingly enough, GASB does say that those regulatory credits, those revenues to be used for future costs, those are deferred inflows of resources or deferred credits under this guidance. But the cost to be recovered, the regulatory debits, if you will, or expenses, those items GASB says you don't report as a deferred outflow. So that's one little, I think, inconsistency in their logic. But as I mentioned previously, GASB tells organizations what items they can record in these new elements of the financial statements. So your regulatory liabilities are a deferred inflow of resources. Pension and OPEB gains and losses that are credits, those will be reported as deferred inflows as well. And if the change in fair value of your hedging derivatives ends up being a reduction in fair value, the offset to that is a deferred inflow of resources as well. So that's it as far as our deferred inflows. I also wanted to go through some of the other balance sheet accounts. You were correct. Go to the slide 10, please, the next slide. I also wanted to go over some other assets on your balance sheet where GASB differs from FASB. One of the differences are that all investments under GASB are reported at fair value. Under the FASB and SEC model, as you probably recall, only certain types of investments, those investments that are part of a trading portfolio or that are part of an available for sale portfolio, get reported at fair value. Investments that entities hold to maturity get reported at cost under FASB. So GASB requires all investments to be reported at fair value. Most utilities will also present unbilled receivables on their balance sheet as well, and that's due to the timing of billings. You'll learn JEA's billing cycle is a long period of time, and due to the volume of customers, it's impossible to do all of the billings right at the end of the year. So the billings happen on a cyclical basis over, I think it's a 4 to 6 week period of time. So at JEA's fiscal year end, there are some services, whether it's water or electric services, that have been provided, but they have not yet been billed. So the unbilled receivables accounts for that. The cost to be recovered from future revenues, the regulatory assets that we went over, or regulatory debits, and the deferred outflows of resources that I've already covered. Those two items are different from FASB. Next slide, please. As far as liabilities on your balance sheet goes, the key GASB differences from FASB, your net pension and OPEB liabilities are calculated using different assumptions under a GASB model as opposed to a FASB model. Also, your asset retirement obligations, those get calculated different under a GASB model. You will find out in both of these cases, GASB's reporting is usually much more streamlined and not as complex as the FASB methodologies in these two areas. And then, of course, your deferred inflows of resources you won't find in that terminology used in FASB. Next slide, please. Perhaps the biggest difference you'll find on your balance sheet is the net position, or the net assets, the excess of your assets over your liabilities. So your equity classifications are very different, and they reflect the availability of resources, and it's titled net position instead of like retained earnings. But since JEA is a governmental entity, keep in mind there are no ownership interests. So things like retained earnings, common stock, obviously that doesn't apply. The three classifications of your net position are net investment in capital assets, restricted and unrestricted. Your net investment in capital assets is exactly that. It represents the investment JEA has in its capital assets. And the reason why that is classified separately is that those net assets they're not spendable, they're not liquid. And what that represents at a high level is the net book value of your capital assets, less any outstanding debt and any related items that are used to either acquire or construct those capital assets. Restricted net position, that reflects the resources, the net resources that are restricted either by law or contract. So, and anywhere where your debt agreements may require you to set aside funds and things of that nature, those would be restricted, as well as any other restrictions that are required through laws. And then unrestricted, those generally are available for use. Those are the most liquid of your net assets. And those unrestricted net assets can also be designated or set aside through board action. And in the case of any designations, those designations are required to be disclosed in the footnotes to your financial statements. Next slide, please. Moving on to your income statement accounts or your revenue and expense statements, some of the key differences between GASB and FASB. Generally, the operating income and non-operating items are very similar between GASB and FASB. One difference you'll see are investment earnings include both realized and unrealized gains and losses. And again, in the private sector, usually you'll see those recognized separately unless you're a not-for-profit organization. And there is a separate section in a revenue and expense statement for statements prepared under GASB. And in that contribution section, that's where you'll find the contributions made to the city as well as developer contributions. GASB also recognizes special items which get classified after contributions. And those are items that are unusual or infrequent, but not both. And that's opposed to those extraordinary items, which is recognized under FASB, which are items that are both unusual and infrequent. And to give you an idea of a special item, back when the SJR PP, the St. John's power plant, was shut down, the losses due to that, the impairment losses on the assets that were taken, the estimates of some of the costs to shut down that facility, that was reported as a special item, not as being unusual for a utility, but it certainly was infrequent. So management elected to classify that as a special item. Next slide, please. Statement of cash flows, there also are some differences between GASB and FASB. The two primary differences are that GASB requires the use of the direct method of cash flows, and GASB does not permit the use of that indirect method of reporting cash flows, whereas FASB permits either the direct or the indirect method. GASB also separates your financing type activities into those that are capital related and non-capital related. The direct method does require a reconciliation of your operating income to your net cash provided or used in operating activities, and your non-cash type items generally are similar to FASB. So let's say you acquired an asset through issuing a capital lease. That would be reported as a non-cash item, very similar to FASB. Next slide, please. Footnote disclosures, generally they're the same. Pension and OPEB and asset retirement obligations are different under GASB versus FASB. They're generally more streamlined. Obviously, the use of regulatory accounting and the rate-making process is required to be disclosed for utilities that follow regulatory accounting, as JEA does. And the details of your regulatory assets, your costs to be recovered from future revenues, and also your regulatory credits, the revenues to be used for future costs, those are also required to be disclosed. All other disclosures are very similar to FASB requirements. Next slide, please. I wanted to mention there's two important accounting changes coming up in the next couple of years that will significantly impact JEA's financial reporting. Those are GASB Statement 84 on fiduciary activities and GASB 87 on leases. GASB has recently issued an exposure draft, which is like a preliminary standard that's expected to be adopted very shortly, that will allow the implementation dates of these two standards to be extended out one more year as a result of COVID-19. And GASB is also researching a new financial reporting model and revenue recognition. Next slide, please. We're getting to the end. I think there's only 2 more slides left. Just on GASB 84, the fiduciary activities. So how will that change your financial reporting? It will require that your pension, your OPEB, and other fiduciary activities to report financial statements, both a balance sheet, if you will, or a statement of net assets and a statement of changes in net assets as part of JEA's reporting entity. So right behind the statement of cash flows as is currently presented, you'll have to present these statements for the St. Johns River Power Plant pension plan, which is a frozen plan, and also the OPEB, the other post-employment benefit plan. GASB 84 will also require additional audit effort and additional disclosures in the footnotes, and it will impact the timing of the information needed from JEA's actuaries in order to provide the information necessary to adopt the standard. And as I mentioned, the original effective date would have been this fiscal year 20, but GASB is going to extend that to fiscal 21 for COVID-19. And the next and final slide, please. And the last standard on leases, that standard is going to require all leased assets and lease obligations to be recorded on JEA's balance sheet if they're material. It will require the use of estimates and assumptions to be made by management. The good news for our utilities is that it does exclude all the utility power purchase agreements, which is a good thing. That was not in the original draft of the standard that GASB set out, but they got a lot of feedback from the utility community that would be burdensome and would, it would misrepresent their financial position. The lease standard originally was effective for JEA in fiscal 21, but again, that is going to be extended to fiscal 22 as a result of COVID-19. And that's my last slide and concludes my presentation, and I'll open up for any questions that anybody may have.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
John, is the CIAC the same in GASB and FASB? Is there any changes that have been made in the last few years?
They have not made any changes in that area.
Okay.
Other questions, comments?
And
thoughts?
how long, how long have we used E&Y, and when would we be up for the normal course to review the contract?
Well, I think as Joe mentioned, E&Y, we've been auditing JEA for about 15 years now. Our current contract ends after the 2022 audit.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And I do know we have an audit committee meeting coming up, I think, in a couple of weeks, and we'll get a chance to delve a little bit more into that and any other details in the financial reporting area with the audit committee.
Through the chair to board member Lanahan, we have put that contract out for bid in the past, but E&Y has been successful in retaining the business. And we last, as John pointed out, we last bid it out a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it's a 5-year contract.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other comments, questions? If there aren't any, I mean, Joe knows me. He can provide you with my contact information. And if anyone on the board ever has any questions regarding the financial statements, finances in general, or anything related to financial reporting, I'll be happy to answer your questions at any time.
And further, as I've explained in John's bio, he's not only an adjunct professor at USF, but he's taught my finance group he and his staff have taught my finance group on several occasions about upcoming changes to GASB as well. John is a phenomenal resource to have for JEA.
Could you talk
about we have, Mr. Chair?
Mr. Baker, you started speaking on mute, so you're unmuted now.
Thank you. Can we move on to Caren Anders with the monthly financials and operations dashboard?
Yes, Carrie Stewart, our Vice President and Chief Customer Officer, is going to start our discussion.
Good afternoon, board members. This spreadsheet is the dashboard that we use to track JEA's key performance indicators on a monthly basis. We use this dashboard internally to track corporate measures, and it's representative of hundreds of other department level performance indicators. Each year, we set our annual department level goals before the beginning of the fiscal year and ask for input and approval from the board of directors into what's important to track at the corporate level. To orient you, there are 3 sections of the dashboard, with the top section listing the key corporate measures used for performance management. The second section represents other department level measures that are important for us to watch, but do not rise to the level of the key indicators. The third portion is strategic metrics that have long-term influence on JEA, but they're not contained within any of our individual departmental metrics. At board meetings, we will cover the metrics in the top portion of the dashboard only. So I'll start with the metrics related to customers and community. As Paul McElroy mentioned earlier, we use JD Power as one of our methods to measure customer satisfaction. It's an internationally recognized measurement and stacks us up against 143 other utilities of all sizes across the United States. As you can see from the year-to-date results, we have not had the best results from the first 2 waves of residential surveys. This is largely due to the communications in and around JEA the last year plus, and those communications have overlapped with the surveys when they go out and conduct them with our customers. The team and customer experience is working hard to impact those scores in the next 2 survey periods before we close out the year. I'm happy to do a deeper dive into the survey results at a future meeting or with any of you individually in the coming weeks. The next measure is first contact resolution, and that's an important measure of JEA being easy to do business with. While this measure is yellow, the customer experience team believes we will certainly meet this measurement this year and possibly exceed it. And then if you jump down to community impact, you'll see that we're also on track to meet our volunteer hours metric. And in this COVID-19 environment, to achieve the volunteer hours goal, customer experience team has come up with clever volunteer opportunities that keep social distancing intact, like reading to school children virtually. I'm going to turn the spreadsheet over to Caren now.
Thank you, Carrie. Under customer, we have two reliability metrics. The first one is CAIDI, which is the average duration of an outage experienced by customers who actually experience an outage. And we're currently tracking slightly worse than our goal. This is due to a severe storm that we experienced in February. Some of our neighboring utilities were able to exclude the storm as tornadoes touched down in their territories, which is one of the exclusion areas. We fortunately did not experience the tornadoes, though we had very high winds. I will note that our goal is aggressive, and even the current number of 57 is better than our peers experienced in 2019. We also track SEMI-4, which is customers experiencing more than 4 outages. You may have recalled when we did our presentation at the last board meeting that the goal and the normal standard that utilities measure by is SEMI-5. But because we had done so well with that, we moved to the more aggressive goal of SEMI-4, and we continue to perform very strongly, which is a reflection of the capital investment and the maintenance of our system by our employees. Under community impact, I'll discuss our 2 safety goals. Our safety theme for fiscal year 20 is prevention, and we are now tracking leading versus lagging indicators. So we are measuring how promptly we address items observed during our safety checks, and where appropriate, the time completion of work orders with safety implications. We're currently meeting our goal of % of safety checks closed on time. Relative to the % work orders closed in a timely manner, you'll notice that is marked TBD. And that's as we work through some changes with how each group documents work management. In March, or as of March, the energy group was 100% on time and closure. And in April, we will roll in water and wastewater as well as facilities to that metric. Counting accidents after they happen is a lagging indicator, but we still track that measure. It's down below in the scorecard in the dashboard. And I will note that our current rate of 0.59 is the lowest rate that we've seen in the last 20 years of our record. We're concentrating on our safety culture, employee empowerment, and safety leadership, and we believe we're starting to see results. However, safety needs to be a moment-by-moment focus and never something you can claim victory on. Also under community impact is a goal on employee training hours. We're doing very well, and we will continue to focus on online training as we currently are not permitting in-class training due to COVID-19. Under environmental value, we track permit exceedances, and we have had none to date, continuing the strong performance we set over the last several years. And then under financial value, we have 3 metrics: generation fleet reliability as measured by our forced outage rate. In the rating agency presentation, I noted that fiscal year 19 was very challenging. However, our corrective actions appear to be successful. We've not experienced any further clogging issues, and our forced outage rate this year is quite low. We're doing much better than goal. Our O&M spend is below goal, showing close monitoring and cost control. And finally, our cost reduction metric is a metric that measures sourcing savings through our procurement process, and we are on target to achieve our goal. I've received several questions regarding our fuel strategy. A report on our hedging strategy and results is provided to the Finance and Audit Committee, and we do have one scheduled for May. And then if the board would like, I'd be happy to provide a report to the full board at the next meeting, if that's desired. I will note that we hedge approximately 50% of our projected annual consumption of natural gas. We've executed our hedges for calendar years 20, 21, and 22, and we've recently started executing our hedges for 2023 as well. We have been receiving our fuel shipments without problems. Our fuel budget for fiscal year 20 is $373 million. And as of the end of March, our fuel fund balance was at $67.6 million. Part of that will be used to provide the fuel charge rebate that customers will be seeing in response to COVID-19. And with that, I will turn it over to Daryl Calhoun, Vice President and GM of Water and Wastewater, who will go over the remaining metrics.
Thanks, Caren. Good afternoon, everyone. Some of these metrics you'll remember from last week's rating agency presentation. So let's get back up to the top there under customer value. Water unplanned outages, It's the percentage of our customers experiencing unplanned water outages, and it's an important measure of customer reliability and generally the integrity of the potable water system, primarily from a pipe grid perspective, the pipes, the valves, and our response time. In fiscal 20, we stand at 0.6%, or just about 2,100 of our customers experiencing an outage, and our goal there is no more than 2%. Damages from excavators working in the right-of-way continue to be a challenge as it has been for the last few years, representing 18 of 44 damages this fiscal year. And just as a note here, we do perform root cause analyses of each of the incidents, whether caused by an excavator or a normal break of the system. Next one in this category is water pressure less than 30 psi. That's the average number of minutes per month across all of our sensors for which pressure is less than 30 psi on our potable network. 30 psi was chosen because generally anything less than that means the sprinkler heads don't work so good and you really see it inside your home. The minimum regulatory required is 20 psi, just for perspective. We've doubled the number of potable water sensors over the past year, so fiscal 20 could be a learning year as we get into the summer and the irrigation months. We'll have much more data. We finished fiscal 19 at about 9 minutes on average, and that was caused by an extremely dry May portion of the year and a large pipe break that we had in August. Currently, fiscal 20 is in great shape at 1.1 minutes. Lastly, in the customer value area is information technology mean time to recover. It's out of Shawn Eads' area. And it was added to this year's scorecard as a way to capture the focus needed around our information technology system availability. And if there are issues, is the technology team restoring service as quickly as possible? And that's thinking about restoration as Caren and I do in the electric, water, and wastewater system. The metric will eventually be a rolling 12-month average, but at this time it's simply an average of FY20. As you can see, we're currently at 105 minutes, which is over the target of 90 minutes or less. Current performance is largely driven by some significant outages we experienced in December, with our communications networks. AT&T experienced a significant issue for a couple of days across the state. There were also a number of hiccups with our payment vendor, Kubra. As a result, Shawn's team is looking at architectures to determine if it's possible to engineer out failures, as well as working with our vendors to ensure they are providing us highly reliable services. This will be a hard metric for us this year, but we are making good decisions because of the focus, and Shawn's team is not hiding from the challenge. I have two items for you under the next category, community impact. The first is capital invested, and it's obviously an important metric for our community as JEA invests heavily in infrastructure. This metric currently stands at $170 million and includes all capital from water and wastewater energy and district energy services, which we also refer to as chilled water. As you can see from the history shown, or at least on the expanded version anyway, FY19 represents by far the largest expenditure at $497 million. Capital, of course, varies from year to year with number and complexity of projects on the board, but at a projected $450 million for this year, we're on course to easily meet or possibly even exceed our goal for this year. Also in this category and closely linked to capital spend is JCEB spend. That's small and emerging businesses, and it's a goal managed out of John McCarthy's area. It's tightly coupled with our large capital expenditures, and it's incredibly important to the communities we serve. The goal is based on total JEA spend, both capital and operational, with assumptions as to how much JSEP participation we might expect for each project. Rita Scott is the manager of that program, and she takes a look with everyone, and we come up with a goal of how much JSEP participation we might expect. This year's goal was set at 25% of total spend. Last year we achieved 29%, and at $9 million through March, we are on track to meet our goal of $17 million. And again, if you had the total history in front of you, you'd see that we've consistently grown this metric, with FY19 hitting our peak of $18.8 million. Under environmental value, there are three items. The first is consumptive use permit compliance. It's obviously an important metric from an environmental perspective. JEA withdraws on average about 118 million gallons per day from the Florida aquifer to meet our customer needs. And so this metric is a measure of our responsibility to not only comply with our permit conditions, but also to preserve our aquifer. And as you heard last week in the rating agency presentation, we're working hard to ensure a sustainable future supply. And we are currently in compliance with all aspects of our consumptive use permit. Next up is nitrogen to the St. Johns River, and we chose this because it's really the best measure of our impact to surface water. We currently stand at 161 tons through March, and we forecast to finish the fiscal year at 377 tons discharged, which would be another record year. Our permit limit for perspective is 683 tons on a rolling 12-month total basis. So the process improvements that I spoke about last week will become part of the total and become the new normals. But operators always remind me that there's always a chance for a plant upset condition, so I'm always mindful of that. Lastly, for you, I have sanitary sewer overflows, or SSOs, as we call them. They're the number, or this metric anyway, is the number of overflows to waters of the United States per 100 miles of pipe. It's a measure of the reliability and maintenance of the wastewater collection system, including both gravity and pressure pipe, and includes our over 1,400 wastewater pump stations, which we believe to be the most in the nation. Our team successfully collects and treats over 70 million gallons per day of wastewater. FY20 through March, we've experienced just 12 overflows, which is a rate of 0.23 per 100 miles. If we continue that performance, it would put us at a 0.46 for the year, which would be excellent compared to our history of about 0.7. Brian Spell and his team have done a great job over the past year with targeted cleaning, and our new pressure main air release maintenance program should also prove helpful in this category. And as is the case with potable water damages, 1/3 of the 12 that we've experienced to date were caused by excavators working in the right-of-way. I appreciate it. And with that, that concludes our report, and I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair.
It's a great report, y'all. That is a wonderful dashboard and really captures this business, and done a great job. Questions of any of our presenters?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Joe DeSalvo. I think this goes to either Caren or Carrie, but on the safety metrics, I'm sure you track it, but you don't display it, I guess. Time lost due to injuries on the job?
We do track lost time, but I don't have. I can get that metric to you. It is not displayed on the dashboard. We display our two leading indicators and then just our injury rate. So what you're looking for is our lost work day rate.
Right. Yeah. Just to get an idea if it's, how the trend is, trending good, trending bad, or something like that. Right.
I'd be happy to provide that.
Great. Thank you.
I actually have that.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I actually have that in front of me. Through April, our lost time incident rate is a 0.17. Severity incident rate is 3.0. And our RIR for the entire company is a 0.58.
Thank you. Caren, show on the scorecard where the injury rate was. I didn't see that.
Shawn, if you could show it's below. It's in the metrics we watch.
Okay, so it wasn't just that I missed it.
Yeah, and to that end, on the metrics that we watch, I wonder the way this is presented in our board book on page 45 of 89 pages. This is what I call an everything but the kitchen sink slide, and I can't even read half of it, and I can't track from one to the other. So in the future, is it possible to break the metrics we watch out maybe as a separate page with the strategic metrics and just have it easier to read? Shawn, you're laughing at me. Have y'all heard that before?
No, I was actually thinking the same thing when I reviewed it myself.
Okay. Because there's so much great data in here, but either I'm getting old or this is just a lot of information. I can't read it.
We can do that.
Thank you. And I'm glad that you've got some aggressive goals, especially on the information technology mean. I mean, the JEA is famous for always pushing themselves to improve year over year. So I challenge you all just to continue to aim to be better than where we are today. But this is a good report.
I have a question. This is Dr. Haley. Are any of these metrics, do you anticipate where the impact of COVID will hit, if at all? Any ones that go down, any ones that go up, or ones that you're worried about? Just out of curiosity.
This is Daryl Callahan. From my perspective, no. Joe Orfano might want to jump in, but not that I can think at the moment. We've isolated crews working on split shifts, so there might be some expense for overtime, that kind of thing, but nothing substantive I can think of.
Carrie, did you want to speak?
No.
Caren can go first.
I was going to say, for us, I think we're going to closely monitor O&M with the stipend that we'll be paying our crews and the fact that our crews are now primarily doing O&M type work and have not been working on our capital projects. There is a potential for what we budgeted as capital to flow to O&M this year. So that is something that we will be watching.
And this is Carrie. We are looking in the customer area of our service levels not really being impacted with all of our call center agents deployed at home. So believe it or not, we are meeting service levels there. So first contact resolution still is on track. Where we think we'll see areas is where my area blends into Joe Orfano's area, as Daryl said, and that's in accounts receivable and potentially write-offs. But we are monitoring that very closely, and we try to give you guys updates in our twice weekly board updates on the impact that it's having on our customers, and that's demonstrating itself in how they are paying or not paying us right now.
This is Joe Orfano through the chair. Carrie has done an excellent job monitoring delinquencies. From a historical standpoint, our write-offs have been at the low for the industry. Last year, it was 0.12% of our customer accounts were written off. That is a figure that's outstanding in my past experience. However, delinquencies will be up. We're continuing to monitor them. As we pointed out in the rating agency presentation, we ran a scenario where we had a 10% drop in revenues between April and September fiscal year end. That had a really immaterial impact on our credit metrics. So we're in a good place. Yes, we will be running higher receivables. Our cash collections have been down a tad bit, but we continue to monitor, and we have ample liquidity to provide for the COVID-19 negative impact.
One thing I'd add for everybody, because this caught me, if you look at the financials from last week, remember March is 6 months. It's not we're not working off of January to December calendar year. We're working off an October to October. So just when I was looking at, year to date March, I was thinking 3 months at 6 months. So just for anybody's edification, I think it might be helpful.
Okay. Anything else? Any questions of them? If not, let's go to the downtown campus update. Nancy, can you lead that?
Yes, sir. Thank you. And thank you all for being patient. I know it's a lot of information all around for two really chock-full board meetings, your first two. I'd like to just point out for people that received the board package, there is a 2-page memorandum that summarizes a little bit more of where we are, and we can discuss any elements of that. If you go to the next page on the slides, please. So we're going to give just a little overview of the project and how we got here. We'll have Brian companies introduce themselves and where they are in the current project, talk about possible program and size modifications, schedule, and then really at the end, we would love a robust discussion with you all as board members to help guide us into the next set of decisions. And Mike Harriman will touch on this in a few minutes with Ryan Companies, but Ryan has been a good partner, has really stepped back a few times on the timeline as JEA worked through the issues we all know about. And they provided schematic design drawings in, I believe, February. That is the time when we want to step back and think about, do we want to make program shifts or modifications before they would continue with design drawings and start pouring footers, ordering steel, etc. So this is a good point in the project to talk about that, and they have acknowledged this is the time that most companies do it. Next slide, please. This is information that we've studied really historically. We've been studying the downtown campus for several years. We did several internal reviews and studies, and then engaged a third-party study and received a report from them. But the reality of our buildings is they need a lot of work, a lot of attention. So we've got major systems are in need of total renovation repair. A lot of that would require employees, us to move out and not use the buildings for a while. We did talk about renovation, but we would end up incurring multiple moves and expense associated with multiple moves. As an example, during both Hurricanes Matthew and Irma, we had elevator issues, water intrusion issues, and just generally, normally, we continue to be concerned about plumbing, electrical, elevators at times, fire systems. So part of what led the staff and the board to look at multiple times was perhaps a new build of a smaller footprint than what we have in buildings that we bought probably in the 80s. So we want to look at right sizing and space needs and be conscious of our decisions. The board did probably early 2018 decide that build new would be the most appropriate decision. We had talked about occupying space, existing lease space, and were concerned about security as being the bulk electric system operator, and then also branding customers, employees. Next slide, please. This gives a high-level timeline of where we were, some of the things I mentioned. We had earlier pauses along the way because of hurricanes, and we would focus on that for 2 or 3 months at the time. So this has been a long time in development. If you look at that bullet 4, we had been in discussions with the city just coincidentally on the same site where the Ryan project is proposed now. And so the board in the summer of 2018 helped develop selection criteria in buckets of what was most important. And that's how we crafted the selection criteria for a competitive process. And then we, the board actually was the final decision point in April of 2019 to approve the Ryan offering, and we executed a lease in July. Since then, Ryan has been working on development of the project. Next slide, please. So the current team is, of course, JEA, and there are many people at JEA involved. We have an internal working team. Today on the phone with us, we've got Doug Deek, who is the president of the Southeast region for Ryan Companies, and Mike Harriman, who is the project executive. We also have CBRE representative. Stuart Green has served as our owner's representative since late 2017. He is the market lead for project management with CBRE. We also have Mike Harrell on the phone, who is one of the senior vice presidents with CBRE. ASD Sky is maybe observing. They're not going to have a speaking role today, but we engaged them through a competitive process to help us with initial programming and test fits for the building. We will plan to do another competitive offering to hire interior design, and we'll release that fairly soon after we have your direction. David Edwards is our outside real estate counsel, approved by the city's Office of General Counsel. He'll also be with us today as he worked on developing the lease and other legal matters, and he and Jody Brooks have consulted with Jody being back, and hopefully we'll have enough people to answer questions that you might have. So I'm going to turn it over now to Doug Deek with Ryan Companies, who is going to give you an overview, and then he's going to consecutively introduce the balance of the speakers.
Thank you, Nancy. Shawn, next slide. As Nancy said, my name is Doug Deek, and I'm with Ryan Companies. I'm the Southeast Region President for Ryan Companies, and I've been with the company for 26 years. There's some overview information about who Ryan is, but a couple things that I'll point out here. We're a $2 billion business as of 2019, and we are nationwide. We do a variety of things in the commercial development and construction space and design space, including national build-to-suit and corporate headquarters space. We've done millions of square feet of corporate headquarters space, very similar to what you've done here for the likes of U.S. Bank, Pioneer Seed, John Deere, Nationwide Insurance, and those last three that I mentioned, both Mike and I worked on together. So this is right in our wheelhouse. It is what we do. We are a 82-year-old family-owned business, 4 generations within the family. And again, like I said, I've been with Ryan for 26 years. We have enjoyed working with the team that Nancy outlined. And I would say that you've got a very good team, both within JEA working on this and also with CBRE and ASD Sky. CBRE in particular has done a great job. Of course, Trip Gilliford runs the firm, but you've got Mike Harrell and Stu Green, who are both very capable and very good at, one, protecting JEA's best interest and pushing their development partner, us, Ryan Companies, to help make good decisions and focus on the right goals for the project. I will turn it over to Mike, but before I do, I would say that this is a good time in the process to be having a check-in, particularly with the new board. I wouldn't say this is unusual. It's unusual on your side relative to changing board members, changing some executives, but the sequence of the project such that we've gone through a program, we've gone through a schematic design, we've in March provided schematic pricing on the overall program and budget, and now is the time to step back and say that schematic budget and the scope that goes with that, what we want to build, correct, make sure we're heading in the right direction, and then keep moving forward. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mike Harriman with Ryan Companies.
Very good. Thank you, Doug. As noted, Mike Harriman, I'm the project executive for the JEA headquarters. I've been with Ryan for 21 years now, and 20 of it, interestingly enough, has been with Doug and working on a few of the corporate headquarter projects that he noted before. Next slide, please. I want to give you a quick introduction to the team. Obviously, you've heard from Doug and now myself. John Jay, project architect, is leading the project. And then Brad, Rob, and Max on the bottom there are really the folks that have been, along with me, focused on pre-construction, whether that be pre-construction estimating, pre-construction market knowledge, or in Max's specific case, working with the city of Jacksonville and other public authorities to better understand the needs of city of Jacksonville for the JEA project. Next slide. So, public and governmental approvals, we've received a number of them. A couple things. Of the public required or community required input, we've received approval on DIA, or from DIA, the DDRB, and noise variance. Staff level approvals, I'll say the two real key is really the St. John's exemption and the 10 set approval received by the city of Jacksonville. Where we're at today relative to public or governmental approvals we're at a point where we're really only waiting on building permitting. So phased permitting for a project of this size would include foundation, structure, and then overall building permit. Those are really the only things we're waiting on. We would be ready to go from a site work perspective today. So feeling very good about where we've come over the past year effectively in getting those approvals, and we're ready to move on to the next phase of approvals. Next slide, please. So Nancy gave a great overview of kind of where we've come from, and hers dates back a little further than our slide here. But after being awarded in April, Ryan has worked through building elevation approval, essentially programming, which was completed as it sits today, anyway, on January 23rd. And again, it's been noted that we've submitted schematic design, we've priced the schematic design, and as Doug noted very specifically, now's the time to take that schematic design and say, what is best value for JEA? And that's exactly the phase we're in. Really, since the initial submittal in March, we have worked on value engineering efforts since then to get to really where we're at today and trying to understand the potential value engineering options and efforts that we may move forward with. And that's part of what the presentation will be shortly with Stuart Green presenting right after. Next slide, please. So the last thing I'm presenting here is, kind of the current building and its facade along with the parking structure. So what you're looking at is a roughly 200,000 square foot building of glass metal panel construction for the most part, as well as an 850 stall parking deck that includes metal panels and is a precast parking deck. The metal panels were ultimately required for DDRB approval, which is why you see those metal panels on there. Beyond that, I guess I'd like to pass it off to Stuart Green. He will be talking about the value engineering effort kind of as a whole, possible programmatic changes, as well as the importance of kind of schedule from now moving forward. Stu?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Next slide, please. Good afternoon. My name is Stuart Green. I lead CBRE program management for North Florida. We are a global program manager. We manage approximately $78 billion last year. And first, I want to echo Ryan's comments. The team has been exceptional through various transitions. But I would also point out that your internal JEA team has been fantastic, very careful, studied, and thoughtful in their approach. So they should too be commended. You'll see in front of you, these are some of the scheduled dates that we were going to present last Tuesday. And as you can probably imagine, the next month is not improvised. And so there's a series of reviews and approvals and connected activities. 4 critical milestones leading up to kind of loan and land closure of, we hope, between June 8th and June 10th. The first of which is program direction. So we anticipated getting it today. We have looked at the schedule. We tried to rework logic. So we do have that preferred today, tomorrow, as late as the 7th. And program direction, really, the intent there is to get a targeted rentable square feet, targeted parking spaces in the garage, a direction on resiliency, and the exterior direction, whether we're kind of starting over or going with the exterior that Ryan Companies just kind of presented, modifying it in height perhaps. But so those are the 4 things from a program direction that we need within the next few days. That feeds the next deliverables of your team inside JEA and outside with the exercises that update design and pricing, make sure we're hitting those metrics that you assigned in the next couple of days here. And really at 9 working days, that's a considerable amount of work. We are also at that time and shortly thereafter addressing amendment number 2 to the lease, which will modify it programmatically from the decisions you make in the next few days. And there are a lot of pieces to amendment 2. There's 7 exhibits in all. So there's a lot of things that we need to get worked out between 5/18 and 5/30. The execution of the lease amendment will provide us the opportunity to further the conversation with the rest of the partners and get to loan and land closing, the target of which is shown there at 6/8. We're balancing now between 6/8 and 6/10, we think, because of the revised logic. So that's kind of the schedule update. I'll get into recent work and what we've been doing over the last 3 or 4 weeks, and then we'll get into some recommendations and then your discussions. So program shift, the right side, that recent work. First, the numbers and evaluations we've done of late are all order of magnitude. We're really all at a high level until we can get further direction from you on those targets as discussed earlier. And then we can revise program and get more acute with our solutions. But the second point of this is all just a starting point. So this is to open up the dialogue. These numbers and metrics were developed under considerable work through your program and your project team. But there's still recommendations to you from Ryan and CBRE and your internal team. So the metrics we tried to maintain during our evaluation if our objective is to find further efficiencies in your real estate consumption, are number one, we still want to make sure they create a high value. We want to make sure that any modifications we're doing, that the value back to JEA based on prior work and lease terms and all of that is at a high level. And secondly, where we can rely on the previous program, we tried to do that. There's like I said, a lot of work that has gone into that, a lot of good work, metrics from your existing headquarters, other solutions across the region. So we tried to rely on that program. And one last thing to keep in mind, that over the last 3 or 4 weeks, the simultaneous advancement of both your program assumptions, how you're going to modify potentially how JEA acts and works in their headquarters, have to occur parallel with the adjustment of the building design. And the convergence of those two things, like I said earlier, have to kind of converge on a high level of value. And so that's really why we're recommending what we're recommending, and then we'll obviously go on from there. So further efficiencies, how do we do that? From a programmatic standpoint, we look at one of 3 things. Number one, reducing seats, whether that's modifying growth forecasting or eliminating seats or satelliting groups, whatever that looks like, that's the first thing we would look at is getting seats out of the equation. The second piece we look at is vacancy. How many people show up on a daily basis? Whether paid time off or business travel or health reasons, there is certainly people that don't show up on a daily basis. And so factoring in some vacancy is sometimes a normal practice of firms like yours. The third area we look at is workplace standards. How much does each person occupy? So if you've got an existing standard of around a 6x8 or 6x10 foot workstation, can we go to 6x6? Can we go smaller? Is benching a factor? So those are really the 3 ways we look at program. And then from those 3 suggestions, we look at the influences that they have on your broader program. Amenities being one of them. Parking, obviously, being another. If we're factoring vacancy in your headquarters, why wouldn't we factor vacancy in your parking? And then holistically, we did take a broader look at value engineering as a whole. Keep in mind that we have been pressuring Ryan, and Ryan has been pressuring themselves to find good opportunities that represent a good value in value engineering. And so we've been working through that for some time. The 3 pretty big areas that we found during our recent work has been further pushing of the exterior skin towards a more efficient system financially. And we did, keep in mind, we did a lot of work early on in the program. There used to be precast when we initially did the building design, the original building design. There was structural glazing. We've reduced a lot of that. We've gone to metal panels. We've continued that look and found some good opportunities there. We've also looked at photovoltaics, opportunity to get photovoltaics off the roof potentially, and then LEED certification. We have looked at a lot of things. These are just some of the bigger ones, but LEED certification, whether we go from gold to silver or silver to certified, those all obviously have an effect. So next slide, please. So where's the point where value and building design and programmatic choices converge? You can see on the slide in front of you, current program in baby blue is 196,900 square feet. That roughly represents 179 square feet per person and 141 parking stalls. What we're recommending is a shift by approximately 23,000 square feet. And that, like I said, has to do largely with your internal vacancy levels and your workplace standards. Obviously, with that shift, there's a hoteling and a change management conversation that has to happen. But that's a natural progress through this, through an HQ. I mean, that happens. And you'll see also that the garage size is going from 841 to 742 spaces. And so, next slide, please. What that does is it amounts to approximately $11.3 million in costs, gross reduction in costs now. It's based on a present value standpoint, it's a reduction to the lease of about $18 million. And your space and parking both reduced by approximately 12%. And then reduction of interior standards, part of that is space, part of that is amenity area, is reduced as well. And so you can see there that the considerations between these moves and moves potentially further are that hoteling and change management are going to be pretty critical factors, and the understanding of how this affects attraction and retention of talent is pretty critical as well. So that is kind of a walk through the numbers. So I think, Nancy, at this time we would open it up to questions, I believe.
So we were not able to see the slide that I can tell on the screen that has the worksheet and the recommended target, high target, low target. I'm assuming the board members have that in their packet, but I don't know if Shawn would be able to get that up for us.
That one. Yeah. That's the right slide.
So Nancy, I don't know if yours froze, but it's up right now in front of everyone.
Okay, apologies because I cannot see it. If we could go to the last page, 14, I'd like to then open it up to questions from the board and talk through the various elements that we've presented here, as well as others, just to get feedback, questions about the background or going forward.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Joe DeSalvo here. Nancy, I got a concern with the resiliency. If I'm reading this right, current program and recommended is 130 miles an hour capability. 2017 Irma and Maria, it was 175 to 180 sustained winds. And all I know is, having experienced disaster response before, when the headquarters fails, that's supposed to be the operations center for a bunch of stuff. You never get past that narrative, nor do you get past what the population you're serving, the community, what their impressions were. This one, I think if that's what the recommendation is, to go at 130 miles an hour resistance, I think we're lowballing it and taking undue risk, especially with what JEA is going to be relied upon to do in a disaster response like a hurricanes, which are going to happen. I think that number is being way lowballed right now. Thank you.
So if go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I've done quite a bit of work with CB and Ryan, and I do compliment them for the work they've done and the value engineering here. But Joe, you bring up a good point. Is the key question is, under this situation, how much of the building needs to be resilient? I mean, should we put the pieces that need to be resilient in another location downtown? I think that's something that needs to be looked at. Number one, it's, what they're talking about is spending $2.5 million to upgrade the building for resiliency. And the question is, you probably can't get into that location, and people will not be in that location unless you are needed. That's number one. Number two, we're being asked to make some quick decisions, and Paul, was involved in the beginning of this building, and I think his input would be important to work through this. The world, and Stu, you can speak to this a little bit. The world's changing of how people are working. And it might be worth, if people can do it, is look at some of the new buildings that CB is advised on, because the question is, in today's world, do any of the executives need offices? We've taken away a lot of offices of middle and lower management. Do the executives need offices? Can they use huddle rooms and small conference rooms as needed? You look at what Mayo is doing today, they have no offices, and they're working out of huddle and small conference rooms, and it's been very effective, and so of other organizations. I think that, the one thing you bring up, Joe, is important, the resiliency. And the question is, how much of the organization needs to be resilient? And if the rest of it doesn't need to be resilient, do we need to spend the money on that? That's one thing. The second thing I think that is important, and I'd give credit to Ryan and CB to taking the costs down. But, to me, there probably are more opportunities to buy this project down with where construction is in this country right now. So, that would be another thought. My feeling is, what is the exact size per person? How much hoteling opportunities are there? And I think the other thing is resiliency. And, if you really think through those, we've saved quite a bit of money here. Probably $11 million, which relates to, getting the number down from 9.9 million a year of lease payments to 8.4. I think we can get those numbers down even further. And the other question that I have is, should we take weeks, not months, to really think through this thing? Should we get Paul involved? And should we, if people can go to look at some of the newer locations that CB is advised on, to really get a feel for what the sizing of offices, or if we get rid of offices, what the sizing of workstations should be. So those are my comments.
Mr. Chairman, this is Tom Van Osdal. I completely concur with a number of the things that Bobby posited. Number one, what real hoteling opportunities are there? Number two, COVID-19 is teaching many of us, and this meeting is even one very good example, that we can be far more productive working remotely than we probably ever thought possible. And so what opportunities are there for folks not to have to be in this building and be able to perform support functions in other locations? Third is, if not remote to their homes, are there other back office functions that could be located in other areas downtown that wouldn't have to be in this building, and therefore reduce the overall size of the project? So I completely agree with those assertions. I completely agree with the fact that these are really important, sort of decade-long decisions, and I want to make sure that we're being prudent, and while not delaying unduly, that we're investing the time necessary to make prudent decisions. And I would think that Mr. McElroy's assessment and inclusion in that decision-making process would be important. And the last thing I'd say is that, also with whatever footprint then is essential and core, agree with General DeSalvo's concern. I'm in the process with our market-wide health ministry of rebuilding yet a facility in Panama City that was ravaged by winds in excess of 160 miles an hour with Hurricane Michael. And so seeing firsthand the damage that can be done, and couldn't afford that to an essential core utility like JEA. Thank you.
If I might add a little background on the resiliency, because there are many probably correct schools of thought. We designed to the highest wind category in Duval County as far as building codes. We do know that storms are getting stronger, but we also lease an off-site hardened facility for our emergency operations. There are several JEA people that participate at the emergency operation system once a storm is passed and we're responding to storms. But we could also do that remotely. And so there are some redundancies and resiliencies that are already built into this building, elevated finished floor, different generator size than when we first started, dual circuit feeds on the electric system. And so part of it is, where do we want to have the long-term, I would say 5 to 10 year EOC, and how might we operate that kind of function?
What is the cost per square foot for this building?
Stuart, I'm going to let you answer that.
Yeah, so John, right now, based on what we're saving, it is approximately, for hard costs, it's approximately $175 a square foot for the hard costs of what we're saving. For what we're leasing, including development costs and soft costs and other aspects that we've spent to date, you're closer to the high 300s, depending on how you look at it.
And does the high 300s include the furnishings, tenant improvements, and so forth?
No, sir. That is on your TI side. So really, there's two sides of this equation. There's the Ryan side, which is core and shell, and then there's JEA side, which is TI.
And how much is tenant improvements estimated to be?
Right now, Mr. Baker, it's at $110 roughly for the usable square feet, but that is including your TI allowance, and that includes everything. Keep in mind, we've got a significant amount of program quality levels to resolve at this point. So we are managing that number without any TI design as of yet.
Yep, you got a $14 million allowance on the original, right?
Yes, sir.
But that 14 million's in the $400 or, south of $400 a square foot.
Correct.
Yeah. The other thing, just to keep in everybody's mind, and this is, and Paul and Nancy, you probably got an exact figure, but what Paul said to me is to operate this building today that we're in is costing $3 to $4 million above operating costs. And that has nothing to do with our, what we're trying to focus on now. I just want to put it in everybody's mind.
Bobby, I'm going to ask you to let me take over the grading of the search thing and have you lead the board on this. I think you have an understanding that's far beyond certainly mine and perhaps others, just because we haven't been exposed to it. A, would you do that?
Absolutely.
And B, how long would you need to get under the covers so that you understood just exactly whether what's going on? Are we doing the right things? Are we doing Marvel when Formica would do the general tenor? Could that be done in 6 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, I think we got to focus on weeks, not months, John. And I'd love for, and we're going to have to make these meetings open, which I want to do. But if Tom Van Osdale can help work with me, he's just building a building. If Tom would be willing to work with me, we're going to have to open these meetings up, which I think it's the right thing to do. But if Tom would be willing to help me, that'd be great.
I'd be more than willing, Mr. Stein.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Bobby. And how long did you say you wanted to take?
I like to get Paul's input, but I'd say 4 to 6 weeks because I think it's imperative, to get this thing behind us. Number one. Number two, I want to work with Ryan in their timetable as best as possible. And I will say this to everybody is Ryan, CB, and Nancy and her team, everybody is I've spent a lot of time on this and they've given me, they've been extraordinary. And I wanted to thank them in front of this group.
What does
if I may ask,
what does that do to y'all, to Ryan? Because I'm with Bobby. I feel like we're being asked to approve something we have absolutely no ability to approve. And I know that's not your fault.
Yeah. So Doug Deep here with Ryan Companies. I would say we owe you the ability to get comfortable with the building as designed, and the amount of time that it takes, we will afford you. Recognize we've got capital markets issues working against us relative to lenders and partners there. We've got the land under control with the city of Jacksonville. It's their property and we're purchasing it from them. And we have been working well with them on trying to adapt to JEA's timeline. There are some very specific deadlines there that need to be met. We can work through this, but I think we need to reach conclusions in as Bobby said, weeks, not months. I would argue 4 weeks is better than 6 weeks, but we most importantly need to make sure you're comfortable with the building.
I mean, John, I'll work towards 4 weeks. And the other thing is once we've decided on, our plan for, whatever it is to either improve the existing building to make sure it's capable of any type of hurricane, or we try to put another smaller facility downtown. I like to get Joe's input on making sure that we've thought through the resiliency of this thing. If Joe would not mind helping when we're ready for that.
Absolutely, Bobby. No problem at all.
Well, Bobby, I think your idea of having an open meeting is terrific, and it enables all of us to the extent that we can to participate, when we can. And so just let us know when those meetings are, and that way we'll all be more knowledgeable about the thing if we can make a few of these meetings.
And Bobby, relative to hoteling offices, I'd refer you back to CBRE, and Micah's Harold was helpful with the Jesse Ball DuPont Fund when we retrofitted the library. We're seeing exactly what you described, which is we designed it for too much space requirements, and people are beginning to reduce those requirements, and we're getting more density than we even thought we could. So I think you're moving in the right direction. And I'm thankful that we're going to tap the brakes a little bit on this one to allow us to slow down and really understand Because this is a long-term asset for the community and for the JEA, and I'm thankful that you guys are leading that effort.
Well,
My only additional thought, I agree with what the conversation has been so far. I just want to be caution folks that we don't want to make it too dense. We've got a current pandemic that is raging, catastrophe in parts of the world based upon their density. And so while it may be a once in a lifetime thing, we want to make sure that we build a structure so that as our employees and staff are there, we do have the appropriate distancing metrics and we don't make it so dense that we create a different problem.
Well, there are 2 points. This is, I don't know who made this, but it's a long-term building. Number one. Number two, that it'd be worth if CB and Stu and Mike, you could maybe do a field trip so people can see what's being done, and so people in their own mind can figure out whether, we are, being too dense or not dense enough. It's worth seeing what's happening, in new buildings today. So Stu, if you could work with Nancy to coordinate, and I know we're in a different world today, but a field trip to where people can look at 2 or 3 real life new buildings in the community, that'd be great.
Absolutely. We got some good local examples and some regional examples. Tom certainly knows of one.
Okay. Well, I can't tell you how much I appreciate y'all working with us. I was worried. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, sir.
I think that wraps up the agenda. The next board meeting is May 26th, and I hope that Bobby.
Mr. Baker?
Yes.
I apologize through the chair. I just want to, as you go to adjourn to wrap up, for those media on the call, there was information sent out about a press event following this meeting where questions can be asked. We will be using the WebEx technology. It's a separate meeting that was sent to you. And we will also, for those that would like to see it but not participate, it will be streamed on our website as well. Thank you, Mr. Baker.
Thank you, Shawn. Anything else anybody wants to say about any of the things in the agenda today?
Mr. Baker, I just want to make a clarification that Ms. Anders is still our interim CEO, managing director until Paul gets seated on Monday, and want to thank her for her service and support through this matter. But she is still the interim director, managing director, CEO until Monday.
And thank you so much, Caren.
Absolutely.
That's really nice you did that, and we appreciate it.
The only thing I'd add, John, is I would just suggest you and Paul work on a hurricane plan, because the season is coming, and working through that thought process during these times, I think, is important, especially with what we're dealing with today.
Great idea. Great idea. Well, thank all of you. Congratulations, Paul. Congratulations to this board for attracting such a great guy, and we're adjourned. Thank you.
The press event will begin in 15 minutes. Thank you all.
Thank you.